Hello, I am Yuri Dukovny with AWS Solutions Architecture. Today I will show you how you can use the new AWS Principle is AWS Service Global Condition Key to safely grant access to your authorized users, expected network locations, and AWS services together. When you are storing data in AWS Cloud, you are looking for a proper data security controls such as identity and access management, network security, and encryption. Often, when you work with sensitive data, you'd like to assure that only authorized users can access your data, but they can access it only from known, approved locations. For example, you may want to allow access to your S3 buckets only from corporate network or from specific Amazon VPC. Also, you want to make sure that the data is restricted to trusted identities, such as your authorized corporate users. To satisfy these requirements, you can use such AWS IAM global condition keys as AWS Source VPC or AWS Source IP, locking down access to your S3 buckets in S3 bucket policy. To ensure that only trusted identities can access your data, you may limit access to users with your AWS organization by using AWS Principle org ID restriction. At the same time, you want to use AWS services, some of which are accessing your buckets using their own identities and from outside of your network locations, such as AWS CloudTrail or Amazon Macy, for example. If you limit access to your S3 buckets to your organization IP addresses range, you are essentially preventing these services from accessing your buckets. Today, I will show you how to address this with the new IAM global condition key AWS Principle is AWS Service, which allows to restrict access to your AWS resources, such as S3 buckets from a trusted network locations, while simultaneously safely granting access to AWS services. To illustrate usage of AWS Principle is AWS Service Global Condition Key, let's go over a couple of scenarios. Let's go to the AWS Management Console and first take a look at the example where I allow AWS CloudTrail to write AWS API calls logs to my S3 bucket. As far as you may know, CloudTrail allows me to continuously monitor and log AWS API actions across my AWS infrastructure. With AWS CloudTrail, I can create a trail, enabling ongoing delivery of API event log files to an Amazon S3 bucket that I specify. Now let's say that my organization security standards require limiting access to all S3 buckets, including the CloudTrail logs bucket, only to the organization's network. To satisfy this requirement, I go to the CloudTrail destination S3 bucket and add a statement to the bucket policy where I deny access to my S3 bucket from IP addresses other than my organization's ones. When a principal makes a request to AWS, AWS gathers the request information into the request context. Then we use conditions in the policy statement to compare keys in the request context with the key value that we specify in the policy. This condition will be met if the source IP address of the principal making a call, we get this source IP from the request context, is not the one I specify here. I don't want to lock myself out, so for the demo purposes, I'll use my current IP address in this policy. Due to CloudTrail is accessing this bucket from IP addresses that do not belong to my organization's IP address range, this policy breaks CloudTrail logs delivery. If I go to the CloudTrail console, you can see that CloudTrail reports login error for my trail. I'll not fix this policy here. Instead, I go back to the S3 console, choose CloudTrail destination bucket and add another condition to the policy that will exclude AWS service principles from this deny statement. I use Boolean condition here that compares the request context key to true or false. This part of the condition will be met if principal that makes a call is not an AWS service. If policy has multiple condition operators, or if I put multiple keys in the same condition operator like here, they are evaluated using logical AND. So, entire condition will be met when the source IP address of a calling principal is not my source IP and the calling principal is not AWS service. In this case, request will be denied. With this updated policy, AWS CloudTrail will be able to write log files to the bucket, while all non-AWS service principals will be able to access this bucket only from organization's network. Let's check this in the CloudTrail console, and you can see that CloudTrail login has been restored. To ensure this policy works as desired, let's make a couple of API calls using AWS Management Console, checking the status of the EC2 instances running in this region on this account. In a few minutes, a new CloudTrail log file has been delivered to the S3 bucket. Let's also try to list S3 objects from my Amazon Workspace's remote desktop, which has IP address different from what I allowed in the S3 bucket policy, and see that access has been denied. Note that in this example we don't grant but constrain the permissions granted by AWS IAM identity-based policies or appropriate allow statements in the S3 bucket policy. We will see this in more details in the next example. Let's take a look at another scenario when Amazon Macy is delivering sensitive data discovery results to the S3 bucket. Amazon Macy uses machine learning and pattern matching to detect sensitive data stored in Amazon S3. To ensure long-term retention of Macy sensitive data discovery results, I configure the S3 bucket for my repository within 30 days of enabling Macy, and Macy stores the sensitive data discovery results in JSON line files, writing them to the S3 bucket as gzip files. If we take a look at the S3 bucket Macy uses to write the results to, its policy has a number of statements allowing AWS Principal Macy to put objects and to get bucket location. Now, following my organization's security requirements, I'd like to limit access to this bucket only to the principals, AWS users, groups, or roles that belong to my AWS organization. I can add the corresponding deny statement, limiting any access to this bucket to the principals belong to my AWS organization's accounts using AWS Principle org ID global condition key. This would block Amazon Macy as well, due to Macy uses its own principal to access my S3 bucket. To allow Macy writing the sensitive discovery results to this bucket, I'll use AWS Principle is AWS Service global condition key again to allow AWS services to access this bucket. Let's try accessing this bucket from AWS CLI using temporary credentials while signing into my AWS account with AWS SSO. I'm signing in with my external identity provider user, and you can see I can list the bucket content successfully. Now, let's say I mistakenly granted access to this bucket to the sandbox account outside of my AWS organization. In general, I can grant cross-account access to my AWS resources using cross-account IAM roles. Alternatively, I can use resource-based policies if the specific AWS service supports them. For the S3 buckets, I can also use access control lists or ACLs to grant access across accounts. In this example, I have access granted to my sandbox account using the bucket ACL. Now, in my CLI window, I'll use another AWS profile configured with IAM user credentials for my sandbox account. When I'm trying to list the account content, my access has been denied. As far as you can see, even ACL allows access from an internal account principal org ID key condition in the bucket policy blocks it. Also, I've just had Macy's job finished here, and you can see it delivered new findings successfully. At the end, I wanted to address the question I've been recently asked. Can I apply this protection for my entire AWS organization when I establish my data perimeter? Or, in other words, can I use this key in the organization's service control policies or SCPs? To answer this question, let's clarify first that SCPs control how identities that belong to your AWS organization's accounts use AWS services and resources. SCPs do not have impact on the identities outside of your AWS organization's accounts. So, if you granted cross-account access to your resource to the account outside of your organization, or you granted access to the AWS service that uses its own principal to access your resources, such as AWS CloudTrail or Amazon Macy, your AWS organization's SCPs are not applicable in these cases. Therefore, while you can use such AWS global condition keys as AWS Source VPC or AWS Source IP in your SCP deny statements conditions, these deny statements have no impact on the AWS services principles, and it would not make sense to use AWS Principle is AWS Service Global Condition Key in your SCP. You've just seen how you can use the new AWS Principle is AWS Service Global Condition Key to simplify resource-based policies while limiting access to trusted identities and expected networks, at the same time granting access to AWS services that use their own service principles from outside of your network locations. Thank you for watching. It was Yuri Dukovny with AWS Solutions Architecture.